Plugged into the mainline, hooked up to the grid. My memory's glowing, strung out like a squid. But there's nothing going on behind my eyes, my eyes, my eyes. And there's no one at home to find the time, the time, the time, the time. I've been daydreaming, lost in the wild. Daydreaming, no, 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 no. I've been daydreaming, lost in the wild. Daydreaming, no, 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 no. I can be all the things I feel.
I get everybody's attention. It's time to come back from the break. The breakee. It might be the breaker here pretty quick. From the brink. Well, we're gonna get started again. First off, after the break here, we're going to hear a message from Congressman and Governor-elect Armstrong. So we will play that, and then we will get on with the rest of the program.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Bismarck. Thank you for advocating for North Dakota water systems. Your work ensures that everybody in our great state have access to water. Communities, houses, agriculture, industry, all of them could not survive without your hard work. And you have the daunting task of managing to find your funding from federal, state, and local sources. And then you have the daunting task of dealing with federal, state, and local regulation. We appreciate very much what you do. Thank you for being in Bismarck. 61 years for your conference. What an honor. I wish I could be there in person, but I am in my last week in DC trying to figure out how to get a farm bill done and government funding done. So as we transition out of here, by the way, I think this is the last video I'll cut as a congressman. So this is kind of surreal for me, and I have appreciated working with all of you over the last 6 years, and cannot wait as I retire from Congress and move into my new role as governor to continue to work with you in the future to make sure North Dakotans from one end of the state to the other, and whether it's in the agriculture industry, whether it's in big communities, small communities, have access to reliable, affordable water. A big part of what you do every day is hugely, hugely important to our whole state. So thank you very much.
As I mentioned before, it wouldn't be possible to put on some of these conferences without the help of a lot of the other parts of the water world. At this time, I'd like to particularly thank our water champions, the AE2S engineering firms, and we're going to watch a short video on their activity. And while that's playing, I'd ask Cory to come up and introduce our next speaker.
The AE2S perspective. At AE2S, we see success differently. It's not just in the details of a project, it's bigger than that. We look at things from your perspective, a decision maker's perspective, an operator's perspective, the public's perspective, a whole system and big picture perspective. We truly care about empowering our clients with the tools to make their jobs better, the lives of their residents better, and provide solutions that are fully thought out from every single perspective.
All right, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Lloyd Knight. Lloyd is the Deputy Director at the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. He is primarily responsible for intergovernmental industry and legislative affairs. Mr. Knight has been with the agency since 2009, serving as, Administrator of the Division of Plant Industries until becoming Deputy Director in January of 2023. Lloyd's career has provided him the opportunity to work in every county in Idaho and with colleagues throughout the Pacific Northwest. Lloyd holds a degree in animal science from the University of Idaho, and he and his wife Brenda have 2 children and live in Meridian, Idaho. Please give a warm North Dakota welcome to our new friend from Idaho, Mr. Lloyd Knight.
Good afternoon. Okay. We good? All right. Thank you, and thanks for having me in North Dakota. It's been a great day to listen to your previous speakers and learn about some of the great advances and work you're doing with water in North Dakota. And I think it's an important way to kind of set the stage for some of what we are dealing with in Idaho. We've gone through a very interesting water year. A good chunk of the year was taken up by some really big fights about water quantity and water rights within our state, with us in the backdrop, or at least in the background, dealing with some water quality and infrastructure issues that I'll talk about today. Just by way a little bit of background of what we do at the Department of Agriculture, we do have a Department of Water Resources in the state that takes care of all the water supply and delivery issues, all the regulatory things related to that. Unlike most states in the country, the State Department of Agriculture actually does the aquatic invasive species and noxious weeds work as well in our agency. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm not actually, to be honest, I'm not sure what happens in North Dakota. In most states where I've given this kind of talk, it's usually, some of what I'm talking about is usually with the Fish and Wildlife Agency, but it is with ag in our state. And I'll try to teach you a little bit about what we're doing, or tell you a little bit about what we're doing in our state. I was asked to speak specifically about the invasive species program, but I will note as I get started, based on some conversations we had off to the side earlier today, aquatic noxious weeds are also a significant part, and actually, have been something that we've done for nearly 20 years in Idaho. Eurasian water milfoil, flowering rush, curly-leaf pondweed, some of those kinds of things have been programs and projects that we've been involved with in our agency for quite some time. And in fact, statewide, I was thinking probably about 3 dozen treatment projects each year statewide. Most of those are chemical, some of them are diver and hand removal, but we do those throughout the state as well as the invasive species that I'm going to talk about. And in our world, invasive species and noxious weeds are different statutes, different budgets, some different projects. But by way of background, the invasive species program for us has been in place since about 2008, 2009. The legislature put the authorizing statute in place in 2008. In 2009, they came back and took care of some funding and budget issues. and kind of gave us some more clear direction about what they wanted to do. At that time, and still today, the primary species of concern are zebra and quagga mussels. Some legislators saw and stakeholders saw what was going on in other parts of the country, saw how the move of those mussels was starting to happen from the East Coast and Great Lakes to the west, specifically into the Colorado River system, Lake Havasu, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, that part of the world. And they wanted to have a prevention program in the state of Idaho as well. So they started making those investments early on. As a prevention program, we spent a lot of time learning and planning. We spent a lot of time talking to the public about what it was we were doing. We spent a lot of time monitoring, and we spent a lot of time inspecting boats. And from the beginning, it has been a learning process. We were one of the first states to have a statewide program that looked quite like ours, especially when it came to watercraft inspection. We have a mix of funding for the invasive species program in the state. State general fund dollars that the legislature has changed some of that mix over the years and added over time to that general fund investment. We have dedicated funds. We have a watercraft sticker that goes as part of the in-state boat registration, and then it's required for those boats that enter the state prior to launch. And then we have some federal cost share dollars through the Army Corps of Engineers, and then a couple of other federal grants there along the ways. You would, if you came to Idaho during the season, you would see that we have somewhere between 20 and 25 inspection stations statewide on routes coming into the state, kind of depending on the mix of what we've got going on for availability of locations, crews, that sort of thing. On average, though, now we're running about 23 stations a year. We also have some roving crews that go through that. From the beginning of the program, we've done about 1.2 million inspections of watercraft from the beginning of the program. Last year, we did about 156,000. That number will continue to go up after we had some findings of mussels that I'll talk about in a little bit. One of the first important activities in the field that we did when the program started was monitoring and surveillance. So we have statewide taken more than 15,000 samples. That number has continued to increase, and it is in really anywhere we can get safely with our crews throughout the state. So we cover every corner of the state. We have multiple sampling events in each one of those water bodies. If you're familiar with the map of Idaho at all, you'll notice that the Snake River obviously is the main river through the southern part of the state. The tributaries and reservoirs that feed into the Snake River. There's a hole in the middle where there's a wilderness area where we can't get folks in and out of there in a timely manner to take care of sampling, but really we cover everywhere else. And our focus from the beginning was to try to get everywhere that humans can touch with a boat. Everywhere that's a water body that of any significance that takes care of the folks in the state of Idaho. Again, over time, we've refined that strategy, but our goal from the outset always was that we would sample often enough, frequent enough, and have a high enough quality sample that if we ever found an infestation of quagga or zebra mussels, that would be early enough that we could do something about it. We also, from the first days of the program, started talking about what a rapid response plan would look like. And to be honest with you, from the beginning, and even up until the last couple of years, I think that we all looked at that plan and wondered what it really would mean if we ever got in a situation we had to do it. I think we all assumed, or at least hoped, that it would have something rapid about our response, but probably never really appreciating what all would go into it. So our plan, even if you pick it up today, talks a lot about communication and decision-making. It talks about how we decide when a water body is infested or not. Because quagga or zebra mussels are the kind of things that you may find one and never find a duplicate. Or you may find one and maybe you're not sure if it's alive. Or you never found an adult, you only found the microscopic veligers. So we had to have something that kind of walked us through when we decided something was really infested or if we're just kind of seeing ghosts in the background. And then we also have in that plan talks about who we communicate to and with and in what order. Really kind of important because we wanted to make sure as an agency that if we were going to ring the bell in a state like Idaho with all the interests around water that there are and all the political interests, that we wanted to make sure that when we rang that bell, we were ringing it for real and the right people find out at the beginning. So what you won't see in that rapid response plan is a detailed plan of exactly what product we're going to use, how we're going to use it, and how much it's going to take. Because we knew that no two water bodies in the state are exactly the same. We're dealing, which sounds very elementary, right? But we knew that we have areas we know that we have areas of the state where we have endangered species concern or anadromous fish concerns. We know we have areas where the consumptive use looks very different than others. Some are primarily used for recreation. There's a lot of water comes out of there for irrigation, hydropower, and some of those other uses. So we knew that when the time came, we were going to have to sit down and spend some time looking at what is specific about wherever we found that infestation. And we knew those details would be very specific to that location. We knew that if we used pesticides, we'd have to have pesticides that were already registered in the state of Idaho. It just, quite frankly, takes too long to do an emergency exemption. You can, but it takes a while to do an emergency exemption or emergency registration of a pesticide and get through that process. So you'd hope you have something that was already registered in the state. We had to identify what some of those other water uses are in particular water bodies. Are there any of those ESA concerns? What are the logistics of those? And I'll talk about some of the logistics we dealt with in the last couple of years. This seems fairly simple when you follow that group of boxes. I mean, obviously the first person we're going to talk to is the governor, and we've had to talk to him 2 years in a row to go to him and tell him we had mussels in the Snake River in Idaho. But you need him to guide you from the beginning. At least in our system, it's a fairly quick and easy process for us to get in front of the governor and give him that information, but we also need to give him options, let him know what we're thinking of, and get his blessing to move forward. And that includes everything from emergency declarations to identification of supplies that we need, all those kinds of things. This is a pretty simple map of what most state agencies or government agencies have to go through in making some of those decisions, but they're what we've learned over the last couple of years as we've done some treatment. So as I've mentioned, we've done a treatment for quagga mussels 2 years in a row now. Actually, when I was contacted by folks to come speak to this, it was actually before we found this year's treatment. They'd reached out to our state water users group and over the summer asked if we could come visit, and now you get, I guess, 2 for the price of 1 from the standpoint of talk about 2 experiences that we've had in the same area. But our rapid response has been fairly rapid. Both this year and last year, sometime in the month of December, this year it was September 24th, we had that positive detection. And we immediately went and told the governor what we thought we were dealing with and started making plans. What followed was then roughly about 10 days to 2 weeks of what we call delimit sampling, which basically means is we just sample the heck out of that area where we found those positive samples, try to better define what the infestation is. Last year, we actually found enough of what I'll call a hot spot, of enough veligers, the microscopic veligers that showed up, that we sent divers down, and they found 1 adult mussel on a rock in the bottom of the Snake River below Shoshone Falls in about 15, 20 feet of water. This year, we actually didn't have enough positive samples to really give us a hot spot to go to, so we never found an adult this year. And we set up everything to have a treatment ready to start on October 8th. That treatment went from October 8th to October 19th, and then we were complete with that first treatment, and now we're planning for potentially a second treatment. So let's talk a little bit more detail about what those treatments look like. Last year, that positive detection was on September 18th. And really, nobody in the country has really had to deal with a treatment to this size or scope, certainly not in a running river. There have been areas of the country where they've done them in what I would call smaller ponds or lakes, contained systems. But certainly this was the first detection in the Columbia River Basin. We immediately quarantined the section of the mid-Snake. So you can look on Google Earth now or when you get home tonight, and what I'm talking about is an area around Twin Falls, Idaho. Last year we did a treatment that was from October 3rd to the 13th, 2 96-hour treatments. We had a copper product that we got up to 1 part per million in that stretch of the river. So that stretch of the river measured at 1 part per million of a chelated copper product. And we felt pretty good about that treatment. All of the testing that we did at the time showed that we got the river up to 1 part per million. It showed that in the post-treatment surveys that we didn't find any veligers. We knew we had to get through an active year of additional sampling in that section of the river to see if we were successful. But we felt good going into the winter, if not just a bit nervous. This kind of highlights that area that I'm talking about, and these were the positive veliger samples we found this year. And again, we didn't find them till the end of September. So clue number one for us as we went through this was we're dealing with a population that isn't really going to show its head until late in the season. For us, September 24th is getting right up against when guys are starting to shut down those canal systems, when they're about to be done irrigating. And so that's something that we knew, that now is something we're learning about that section of the river. Those numbers that you see, you probably can't see it real good. This is kind of a busy slide. You see some green dots on there with numbers. Those are the number of veligers, again, the microscopic veligers that we found in that section of the river. So not very many in the mighty snake. When we came out of last year's treatment, the legislature saw obviously that we were dealing with something and they needed to make additional investments. And the legislature and the state over the years has been very generous to us from the standpoint of making sure that we have the prioritization, that we have the funding that we need to do what we need to do. So we got an additional $6.5 million from the legislature. We got more full-time people. They told us they want us to dramatically expand our outreach and education efforts, which I can tell you was a little bit tough because we don't really like, in a lot of ways, we're an ag agency. We don't like talking a lot about what we do. We don't regulate by doing that. It's not always our priority, but we understand the public needed to learn more about what we were doing. So we really enhanced our outreach to the public, to stakeholders. We doubled our statewide monitoring efforts. Before this, we were running about 1,500 to 1,600 veliger samples a year. We doubled that this past year statewide. September 24th, we found veligers again, and they were in the Shoshone Falls Pool, the Pillar Falls Pool, Twin Falls Reservoir. This section of the river that we're talking about is about a 10-mile stretch of the river that has natural and man-made impoundments through there that basically break it up into 4 sections. There's the Twin Falls section, and there's a hydro facility on top of the falls that was put there about the beginning of the last century. There's the Shoshone Falls is another impoundment, natural impoundment of the falls itself, and another hydro facility. Pillar Falls, which has nothing there, but what it does is it blocks you from getting to Shoshone Falls by boat. Folks will portage their kayaks over this big lava rock impoundment and to get into that other section up to Shoshone Falls. So immediately as we found those veligers on the 24th, we started to do more delimiting. We started to call in eDNA. We hadn't used eDNA before. eDNA is commonly used in the resource agencies. We've never really liked it because you can't tell if something's alive or dead. But we are now using it as a smoke alarm to tell us where we need to do more of our traditional monitoring. And we had to add a new section to our treatment area. We hadn't been above Twin Falls last year. We never found any veligers. We couldn't make sense of where veligers were showing up before. We didn't know if there was a population there that we were missing. We only found the one adult kind of in the middle of the treatment area. But we finally found what may have been kind of the source of all those mussels last year, at least we hope it was. So we've expanded our area to about 9 miles of treatment, and we started to look to identify additional tools and partners. We went back to the same chelated copper product that we used last year, Natrix. Was already registered last year, still registered this year. We felt confident that the product itself was okay. We took those 2 96-hour treatments and expanded them into 1 200-hour treatment. So continuous treatment over that course of time. And we learned that we had a number of operational changes we needed to make for how we dealt with this. We had a lot of operational things we had to deal with, the logistics of getting products in and out of the Snake River Canyon. What do we have available for for areas with which to work. The picture you see on the screen are some of the empty totes that we're rinsing out that are at a boat dock that Idaho Power has above their Twin Falls facility. This was the easiest place we had to get to, and we could get trucks in there and that. We have some areas where we couldn't. This year we spent a little bit of time, more time, thinking about that treatment planning and response effort and those changes that we had to make. And first, we talked about internally, and we've talked about with groups that have asked us to come speak about this. You know, first thing you got to do is try to figure out what your infestation looks like. We always thought, I think, before 2023, even though we had a plan that said we were going to go survey, I think we kind of expected that when we found mussels, it would be really big and obvious. We didn't want it to be, but I think we kind of thought it'd be looking at milfoil. When you find milfoil, you usually will find a big patch of it, right? And you know what you're dealing with. You can see it, you can grab it, you can get it choked up in your boat prop, all of that. It's real. With these, we're finding them when they're microscopic. And aside from the one adult last year, you just have microscopic stuff on a slide that somebody says is mussels. And you can't, it's hard to define what that area is. But we needed to, because it made a difference in what our operation looked like in this section of the river. And we needed to think about what tools are available. The product we picked is great because we're using it at a level that's less than drinking water standard and that we could work with in that area. But I will tell you that in this particular section, it's below a significant diversion, surface water diversion, to where the river, not far above this, it actually gets down to zero flow. Any flow that's in the river that you see in the pictures that I'll be showing you is either irrigation water return or spring flow. But for us, for our treatment, that's actually a good thing because it makes it predictable. And we don't have a lot of water to work with. If we found it out here on the Missouri where I got to cross when I came into town yesterday, there's a lot of flow there. I don't know what the flow is, but it's a big punch. It's a lot. And you might have other diversions and uses going on there that affect what products you can use. So there's a lot that you have to understand in what's defined about what you have in front of you for the problem that you're going to treat. And you have to have a very good understanding of flow and chemistry, use and diversion, endangered species, what's going on underneath there. And we'll have some pictures to show you what's going on underneath the Snake River where we've been working. But we've also learned going through 2 of these treatments that we have a lot we have to rely on with people. And I'm not going to say we ever underappreciated our team, because they all work really, really hard and they're very dedicated. And much like you all here in North Dakota, most of our team are from Idaho, a lot of them raised on the river. So for them, it's a very emotional thing. I was raised on the river too, very emotional thing to see the river have to get impacted the way it is. But you have to really assess what you have in front of you for people and resources that way. What do we have for contractors? How do we make sure our folks don't run around the clock for longer than they really should? How can we assess some of the scheduling and some of that to make sure that we give them a predictable work environment for that 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks that they're going to be on this project? How do we make sure they can get back to their families at some point? And most of these folks that you're going to see didn't for at least 2 weeks. What's the scope of their work going to be? What are their strengths and weaknesses? I'll tell you, last year we tried to take as much as we could on ourselves as an agency within our own house. We're an ag agency, farm and ranch kids. You just take care of it yourself with your people. And I think we all have that inclination to do that when we're in this kind of business. But I think we learned something last year that we need to rely or know when to go ask for some help and get some other resources. I don't want that to be lost. That entire process for our folks was probably 2 weeks of survey and planning, 2 weeks of treatment, 2 weeks demobilizing, and then whatever happens after that. So you're taking up, that's all these folks are doing for that chunk of time. It's a big chunk of our agency that's what they were working on. The folks that are on the rock there, this is at Pillar Falls. Those 4 folks actually are some of our most talented and dedicated folks. They're actually doing a calibration of that particular tote, and we had a couple dozen of these totes scattered throughout the treatment area that are injecting the product into the river. Some of this product went through hydro facilities, some of it was just on rocks in the canyon. They're obviously doing field samples and field analysis of those copper levels. Two of those folks are managers in our group. The gal is one of our most dedicated field staff. The gentleman on the left that's looks like he's lounging is one of the most intelligent PhD folks I've ever been around. I don't say that about PhD folks a lot. But he actually is with the CPRO, the registrant for the product. And I mean, that guy, during the last 2 treatments we've done these last 2 years, has really, there's 2 of them from CPRO, and just, you can't find more dedicated and passionate people. But you got to find people like that. And in most cases, we're not going to have those in our agencies. Logistics was a big thing. Again, this is another look at kind of the same area of Pillar Falls. But getting things where we needed it was a significant thing for us. This was all, at least in this section, is all in a canyon. Some of it we can drive to, a lot of it we can't. A lot of it we have to move things by boats. We have to quarantine an area, which means we've got to be able to secure access to it. Enforcing that quarantine can be a challenge because folks are willing to walk down the side of canyon areas like this to go down and just go screw around or get on a kayak or do whatever they're going to do. In this day and age, there's folks that the minute you tell them they can't do something or you'd rather they not do something, they want to do it all the more, right? So we had to deal with some of those challenges. Logistics and the right tools and equipment is always going to be something. You all know that far better than I do. I've listened to some of the presentations you've had, and I know you all are involved in staging equipment and supplies and stuff every day. We had to helicopter in boats to where we needed them, which isn't such a big thing, except that this year, every helicopter in the state was tied up in a fire contract, and more new fires started when we needed to start this. We were about this close to having to use a guard helicopter, which was fine, except that kind of takes a whole other level of thing to get the guard loosened up, even for a state agency. This helicopter actually had been on a fire in Boise, a couple hours away, right up until the day before, and our Department of Lands was able to get it reassigned because they got to the right place in the fire. But that was something we didn't really anticipate and we didn't have to deal with last year. But you need to know what some of those special things are. Now, I would imagine that in a state that is doing all the infrastructure investment that you are, and I drove by a lot of trucks and those kinds of things, logistics for you may look a little bit different. It may not, but it is something you have to consider. So then I can show you a few pictures of some of the things that we've been working on and talk through some of those issues. The picture on the left, if you can see it, and I hope you can, that's a big old rock. And in the upper section of the treatment area where we were, the bathymetry that goes on underneath there, this is all volcanic activity that has formed all of this. There was a tender boat that had to go by this particular rock, I don't know how many times, and our tours that we took through of legislators and stakeholders and all of that. But our contractor had to plan around that. He had to have the right size boat to carry a ton tote, but at the same time be able to get through an area that just above this that only is about 10 feet wide. The channel itself that he can navigate is probably only about 8, because there's rocks like that that are wanting to kill him everywhere. Shoshone Falls is in the middle and on the right. In the middle, you can kind of see the diversion and the powerhouse for Idaho Power that they have at the top of Shoshone Falls. Now, they have a vested interest, so I don't want to make it sound like they were doing this completely out of the goodness of their own hearts, but they did allow us to inject product through their powerhouse and through the intakes there. But it also meant they had to get special permission from FERC to be able to run water over the falls outside of their normal licensed allowance or requirement so that we could use that as a mixing point for product. You probably can't quite tell in the picture, but it's a very lovely hue of blue, which is the color of the product that we were putting over the falls. You can see a boat on the picture in the right at the base of the falls that is one of 2 boats that we flew into that section so that they could inject chemical there. That boat's right on top of a hole at the bottom of the falls. It's about 120 feet deep. That's something you have to consider when you think, how am I going to get that river up to 1 part per million? It's not just the flow, but what do those holes behave like? We found a couple of new holes. They're not new holes, obviously. They're new to us. Call us Christopher Columbus. But those holes we discovered this year, we didn't notice it last year, but they behave different in how they absorb that copper or how they allow that copper to come up. Copper's heavier than water. Copper was going down. We had great levels of copper at the bottom of the hole. We couldn't get it in the middle. So our contractor has, he calls them lit lines. I think they're trademarked, but basically welding hose that would go down into that hole at different depths and inject that copper, and changing the mix of water and the copper product to try to achieve that 1 part per million. Because where do mussels love to live? In places like that. Last year, I'm kind of embarrassed when I say this, because last year we were like, okay, folks, you're all in Twin Falls, you're all staying here, you grab your meal in the morning, or we'll have it we'll bring it to you, or whatever, but it was very, grab your lunch when you can, or we'll bring it to you, but it wasn't very well organized. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, because in agriculture, we're all about food, clearly, but we're all about food, right? And taking care of folks when they're working all those hours. This year, we made them all gather up at 7 a.m. every morning, and we made them breakfast. So the management team, or at least those that were available, this served 2 purposes. One, we made sure they had a hot meal in them, because everybody works better with a hot meal. Everybody's been on a hay crew or a harvest crew. They know a good hot meal at the beginning of the day helps. But it also made sure we had a starting point for all of them, that they had a point zero at each day. And with the exception of about 2 or 3 people that were always out doing sampling at that time, everybody was required to be there at 7 a.m. We had what we called volunteers, which basically were folks outside of the program from elsewhere in the agency or other agencies. They didn't know what we were doing. It made sure we had them hooked up with their teams. Everybody had a chance to ask questions, voice concerns about safety. We had a big snack table there. They could fill their knapsacks for the day. That was going to be their lunch. But it gave us a good start to the day. They got real tired of my pancakes and breakfast burritos, but it gave us that starting point each day. And we had a dinner at the beginning and a dinner at the end. They liked my pulled pork and tri-tip. The beans were a little suspect, but they were happy. They loved the Dutch oven potatoes and desserts, so that all worked out. But this was a consideration that I don't think we probably took for granted that folks needed that. So if you go through something like this, don't underestimate the power of a meal or some point to gather there to make sure people have a place to start. Because people are the most important part. The folks on the left, there's a reason I took this in the morning so that you can see the sun behind them, because they're going to go do fish salvage all day. So they're still smiling at this point, is my point. We had more fish salvage to do last year than we did this year, but we also tried to schedule it in a rotation so you weren't just on fish salvage all day, every day, because not a lot of fun, right? Probably the worst job in the operation. We all took a turn. The gentleman in the middle picture is our bureau chief, Nick Zerflew, who usually does these presentations, but he was about maxed out on his traveling around and was probably going to get coal for Christmas if he took one more trip. He was very important to us, not only in the planning stages, but he was kind of the one that we had tasked, in addition to the director and myself, to making sure we took folks around and showed them what we had going on and answered their questions and made sure they saw everything, that we're very visible that way. But also, we also would all go around as managers and make sure everybody was safe and doing what they needed to do and checking in. And the folks on the right, I don't think they ever, the gal on the far right was the gal that was on the rocks in that earlier picture that I pointed out with the 4 folks. They're rinsing out totes, which is part of the regulatory requirement, of course, with the pesticide to rinse those out. She always had a smile on her face. We moved her around to a lot of different operations, but after about the 4th or 5th hour of rinsing out totes, the novelty wears off. She still smiled. The canyon can be beautiful, and the aesthetics of wherever you do an operation like this can be nice, even though at some point it can be a complete pain and probably present you with logistical headaches that you didn't really ever think you'd ever have to consider. On the left, those totes are on I mentioned earlier when I showed you the picture of the rock, that's the channel I was talking about. That channel's not very wide, and our folks had to go up there several times a day to do calibration measurements. They had to haul in those empty totes and stage them and put them together and then take the nurse boat all the way up there every day. Last year, we did a lot of that ourselves. This year, we relied on our contractor. That's a pretty nice shot in the evening with the moon coming up and all of that. But I think after about the 6th or 8th trip up there in a day of dodging those rocks and trying not to blow your boat up, I think that probably lost a little of its novelty. Constant calibration and consultation. The folks in that middle picture include our director, the gal on the left. Nick, I've already talked about him. PhD from CPRO, Wes Bishop. And then Jeremy, that's kind of the leadership team. And this actually was a picture that I took when we were in pretty tense conversations because we were having trouble getting things up to 1 part per million, and we needed to figure out if we needed to order more totes or not. Chemical was coming from North Carolina. So for us to make a decision on if we needed to order more was a fairly big decision to make, both in dollar investment and time investment, because that was going to have to come a long way. We had to know when it was going to get there with some sort of certainty, and of course trucks are always on time and are always there right when you need to be. But I will also note that this year, one other difference we made. Last year, we deposited totes at several locations within our operational theater. This year, we used a private contractor, one of the fertilizer chemical vendors in the area, made that one spot so we didn't have to go unload those trucks, and they brought the chemical to us when we needed it. Sounds really ingenious now. Last year, we were doing it ourselves. But that consultation and that relationship and the ability to truthfully and openly communicate with each other is pretty important. Because at the end of the day, that picture on the right, y'all have to still be getting along at the end of the day. That's some sampling we did at night when we were still trying to figure out what our copper levels were like throughout the river system. The final thing I would note is the importance, and I say this so that maybe you all learn from this, and maybe you all get along already, and this is kind of something that doesn't need to be said. We had a lot of folks that we worked with, especially in the state family, that our governor, the first thing he did both last year and this year after we went in and talked to him is he called a cabinet meeting together. And he made sure we had an open path with the other agencies in our state family. And that's important because, especially this year, we called on them for a lot of resources. Come to find out, as we were trying to figure out those deep holes I mentioned earlier that are all about 100 feet deep, there was probably 4 or 5 of them, and we're trying to figure out how stuff happens in those holes. We called our Department of Water Resources and our Transportation Department, both of which have underwater drones, and they flew them from North Idaho overnight, got them and their operators down into our project area so that they could go map out those holes and help us figure out what they're doing and take better measurements. Never told us no, never balked, they were there. Department of Lands were the ones that helped us get the helicopter this year. They're obviously the lead fire agency for us in the state. They have all those contacts, they have all the contracts, all of those kinds of stuff to do. And they were in a very tense time, but they still made sure they took care of us. Building those relationships ahead of an event like that is so important. And having a clear understanding ahead of time, not so much of the details of what a treatment might look like, but knowing that we're going to have to move quick, we need to have those open lines of communication, and we need to know that we can anticipate what those questions and issues are going to be. And again, I say it, and you all, the last thing I'll say, and then if we got time, I can take a question or two. There's nothing what we did in that section of the river the last 2 years that may look the same if we go anywhere else in the state. And it may look completely different for you all. We got used to working in environments like that because of what we've done with aquatic weeds. Far simpler, smaller scale, something more predictable, not necessarily urgent in the sense that we're trying to stave off something that could plug up all of the hydropower generation and irrigation in the state. A little bit different feel. But we learned some of that process for how we need to build these, and we were able to scale it up. But we know that what we did in Twin Falls may not look the same in our state, and very likely might not look the same in your state. But you're investing a lot of money and resources that we learned about today, or I learned about today, that's quite impressive, and you may need to rally at some point and make sure you protect some of that. And I hope you have the chance to have those conversations ahead of time. So with that, I can sure take any questions or I can be done.
questions.
okay,
if we-
perfect.
if we get some. Okay, Danny said we do have time for a few questions, and she's got a microphone, so just raise your hand. Just a minute, there's one right behind.
I feel like I'm in an auction, and I'm not sure who's going to stand up.
So did your governor have a specific or a relationship with the river?
That's a good question. Our governor is a rancher from the western part of the state. This is in South Central. So some relationship with this area, but certainly an understanding of what it is we do. So he actually, yes, I guess the best way to say that is yes. He has an understanding of the river. He has an understanding of what's going on. He certainly has an understanding, given the legal fights they were having on water rights this year. The river was a big thing. So for him, there was never any time that we needed to spend convincing him of anything.
Were your inspection stations open 24 hours?
Some of them. The biggest challenge we've had with 24-hour stations is finding the labor to run them and make sure we have law enforcement support to keep folks safe. That's the biggest challenge we have with 24-hour stations.
One of your slides, you mentioned fish salvage. What was that due to? Was it due to the copper treatment?
Yeah, so in addition to being real good at killing things like mussels, some species of fish are very susceptible to copper as well. It suffocates them. Last year, we saw most of our fish mortality with suckers and some sturgeon, which was unfortunate. Carp were the other ones that were very susceptible. Oddly enough, the bass didn't seem to be too affected by it. I don't know if they were able to get out of the way of it or what, but we had a lot of, which the bass fishermen in the area will be very happy with that at some point. But yeah, and basically we were just trying to keep it from being too big of a thing. You know, there was enough of a mortality. We just didn't. They stink.
Okay.
One quick question, I'll just speak up. What was the type of application? Was it in water, was it spray on, and then was it downstream, upstream, the downstream?
Thank you, and I should have touched on this, so thank you, and I can very quickly. This product gets injected directly into the water, so either by hose from a boat or by hose from those totes, number one, or through the hydro facilities, which is the same thing, just as a mixing point. We also had about a 10 or 12 mile dissemination zone downstream where we had that as an area to watch because we had sensitive species below that, and we needed to make sure that 1 part per million went down. What we had as a benefit in our favor is in that 10-mile zone, there's an additional 1,500 CFS added to the river from either spring flow or irrigation return, which helps with that dilution. But our 1 part per million in that treatment zone is obviously our target, and we needed it to be down below 0.2 part per million, about, 12 miles down in that dissemination zone, which we were able to do that. Good question, thank you.
Okay, so that is probably all the time that we have for questions right now. I don't know whether you'll be available for questions out in the hall here, so if you have other questions, go ahead and find them and talk to them. Before we wrap up the end of this session, just a few reminders. Continue bidding on the auction items on the back wall. 50/50 raffle tickets are available. See any of the girls over at the registration desks. The winners of all of that will be announced tomorrow evening at the awards banquet. The money raised from the silent auction helps go to the Water Education Foundation and the Dushinsky Jameson Water Resource Scholarships. So we also need to again thank our convention sponsors for this year. The water champions are AE2S, Houston Engineering, Moore Engineering. Water partners are Apex Engineering, BART Engineering, Bartlett and West, Bismarck Mandan Convention and Visitor Center, Devils Lake Basin Joint Water Resource Board, Onstead Twitchell PC, Vogel Law Firm, the water supporters are Ag Country Farm Credit Service and Farm Credit Services in Mandan, Dakota Supply Group, Dwyer Law Office PLLC, HDR, Minnesota Valley Irrigation in Bismarck, Montana Dakota Utilities Company, North Dakota Rural Water Systems Association, North Dakota Soybean Growers Association. There will be a resolutions committee meeting at 4:30 this evening, and that's down in the Missouri River Ballroom at 4:30. And that's to discuss our continuing resolutions and any new resolutions that come up. This evening at 5:30 is the start of the Western Social in the courtyard. And tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, we have our prayer breakfast, and that will also be in the Missouri River Ballroom downstairs. So with that, we will conclude our session for today. So thank you.